enCore Energy is the most diversified in-situ recovery uranium development company in the United States currently, and is listed on the TSXV, which is Canada, and OTC, which is America, with a market cap of around $371 million. enCore is focused on becoming the next domestic producer of uranium in the United States, has a substantial pipeline of quality development stage assets, both short, medium, and long-term opportunities in the US. And right now it's focused on producing uranium from its licensed and past-producing South Texas Rosita processing plant by 2023. William M. Sheriff, Executive Chair at enCore Energy, joins us live. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hello, William. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Hopefully your audience and yourself can see the presentation at this point.
Yes, I'm sure they can. I worry not about that.
Very good.
Yes. So are you in Colorado or are you in Texas today?
I'm in Colorado. I actually live in Colorado, and the corporate offices are in Texas, as are the first centers of operation, but we have offices across the U.S., including Wyoming and South Dakota.
Okay, well, you're an incredibly busy man. I understand that very clearly. I've run my eye across the company, and oh my goodness, what are you not doing at the moment? You're so busy. So I'm going to be quiet, and I'm going to let you take your presentation away. Over to you.
Very good. And hopefully this will explain some of the necessity of our being so terribly busy. You know, it all starts out, I guess, as a backdrop is the U.S. is the world's largest consumer of uranium to power its fleet of nuclear reactors, the biggest nuclear energy generator on Earth. Right now, the U.S. is consuming roughly 47 million pounds a year and producing essentially zero. And we're heavily reliant upon exports coming through the port of St. Petersburg, Russia, which in essence means that 60% of our needed uranium can be stopped at Mr. Putin's whim. And that's a critical situation that has recently, shall we say, reignited concerns over domestic supply. The U.S. has plenty of uranium. It's just been undercut by pricing from Kazakhstan and Russia, and the time for U.S. To return to some form of dominance is well past. So we're 100% focused on in-situ recovery of uranium in the United States. And the in-situ process I'll go over briefly, but it essentially is a municipal water treatment plant that injects oxygen into groundwater through injection wells. That dissolves the uranium, much as salt will dissolve in water. And we pump the uranium in a liquid form, very dilute, in the groundwater through a plant, very much like a municipal water treatment plant, recovering the uranium on resins, stripping it, re-injecting oxygen fortified water. So it's an extremely green process, and one that will produce uranium on a very economically favorable basis. Let's see if I can get to the disclaimer. This, of course, is the we'll be making forward-looking statements. And this is a graph of your uranium price over the past 15 years or so, showing the last little boom that was about 3 years in process, about 2005 to 2008. And this boom that was coincidental with the general peaking of the commodity cycle prior to the economic difficulties in 2008 was precipitated by a supply interruption at 3 of the largest mines. It was not demand driven, and so it had a very short duration, although very exciting, having peaked at $135. During this time frames when I first became active in the business, being co-founder and chairman of Energy Metals Corp, started in 2004 with a little under 2 million market cap. In 30 months, we'd acquired the largest uranium resource base in the history of the country and sold to Uranium One for $1.8 billion in 2008. Served on their board for a couple of years before starting enCore in 2010. Fukushima came along, which put us on delay for the better part of a decade. And 2 years ago, we saw the renaissance coming. And along with Paul Goranson joining our team as our CEO, who had built the last 3 or 4 in-situ plants in the US, and had actually built a plant under budget and under time back during that 2005 to 6 timeframe, and enjoyed selling into that giant price spike. Along with his talent, really we have a well-rounded, very deep bench in the in-situ, both technically and operationally, and I'll get into that a bit further. But combining those two teams has really put us at the forefront of the in-situ field. Here again, our emphasis is on South Texas. South Texas, we have 2 of only 11 licensed in-situ recovery plants in the United States, and there are 4 in the state. We have 2 of those. We've spent the last 12 months renovating and completely modernizing electronically the Rosita plant. It has now been finished. It's going through wet commissioning as we speak, and we'll be ready to support production in 2023 at Rosita. We have, in addition to Rosita, we have a whole series of production pipeline projects in the US, and I'll get to those in detail later, but overall the company has 90 million pounds of uranium in the measured and indicated category, with another 9 million pounds in the inferred category. This does not include an additional almost 70 million in the historic category, which was largely done by large oil companies in the 70s. We found their data to be quite reliable, and there's an extremely high correlation of conversion into 43101 resources. We will be undertaking that systematically as we move forward, but again, our emphasis is on near-term production. All of it will be through in the in-situ means, which, as I mentioned, is not invasive. You don't have open pits, you don't have underground operations, you don't have many of the things you associate with a mine, including tailings ponds, tailings piles, no dust, no possible breaches of dams, etc. So it's a very quick, very inexpensive way to get into the uranium project, and it also was quite efficient at cleaning up once you're done, so reclamation. We do have, as I mentioned, a very deep bench in it. Our uranium sales strategy is one of a mixed bag. We prefer to have a long-term goal of 50% of our uranium production will be characterized by spot sales, and 50% will be long-term contracts. These long-term contracts will be driven by a series of different nuclear utilities. They'll have floors and ceilings, and they will account for roughly half our sales. So it's a nice blended approach to make sure that we are a long-term player and very profitable in the business, yet exposing ourselves with a significant amount of production to what we believe to be a rather explosive market coming in the spot. Also have a number of other assets that we use to build our balance sheet, non-core asset disposition, of which we've made several over the course of the last year, and you can find those on our website under news releases, as well as an investment in a sister enterprise that's taking our in-situ technology and trying to apply it to other minerals, which would, in fact, should it be successful, revolutionize the entire mining industry. A little bit of information on the company. We have a market cap just shy of 400 million Canadian. We have 107 million shares out with cash on hand of $11.5 million US dollars, as well as $5 million in current assets that are easily convertible into cash. As you may see, and with uranium being so cyclical, and we've having missed several different cycles in the industry, we've got quite a bit of gray hair on our board, and I'll get through some of the key members of our board now. Myself, as we mentioned, our Chief Executive Officer, Paul Goranson. He's built 3 or 4 of the last ISR plants in the country. Some notable positions: he was President of Cameco Resources, Chief Operating Officer of Energy Fuels, etc., and also spent quite a bit of time with Rio Algam. So his distinguished 35-year career has seen him quite active at the forefront of the in-situ development. Dr. Dennis Stover, our current Chief Technical Officer and former Chief Executive Officer, he is one of the 2 co-inventors of the in-situ process, and as such is still a holder of 6 patents, and his expertise is invaluable to us as we continue to make progress not only with the in-situ operations, but improving them and increasing their efficiency. Richard Cherry, 40 years in the industry with General Atomics, having spent a lot of time in contracting with nuclear fuels. Mark Police, a permitting expert, again, 40 years ISR. Bill Harris, our outside expert, when we went to the NYSE the first time, he fulfilled the role of our Sarbanes-Oxley requirement for independent financial expert. And our newest director, I want to highlight Susan Hoxie-Key. She brings to us the unique perspective of our ultimate customer. She was most recently a nuclear physicist with the Southern Company, who is currently loading the first new reactor in the US, Vogtle 3, first new one in 20 years. Vogtle 4 is quickly on the heels of 3. It'll become operational next year. Her job at Southern Company has been not only involved with fuel procurement, but also in terms of designing the actual fuel rod assemblies and bundles that go into the reactor. So her expertise on the board really helps us understand our customer. I'm not going to read all these to you, but I'll highlight Greg Zerzan, our General Counsel and Chief Administrative Officer. He's had about 30 years in Washington serving for the Trump administration in the Department of Interior, where he had 400 counselors under him. Most of the uranium activities in the United States, if they are not in Texas, are on public land, and his familiarity with the Department of Interior and the way the inner workings thereof service quite well. Advisory board, here again, I'd refer you to our website and our PowerPoint. Just in light of time, we won't go through all of those, but we certainly have expertise in every aspect of the fuel cycle, from discovery, exploration, all the way through production and ultimately reclamation. So this perfect storm that we're seeing now in the uranium sector, bipartisan support. This is the first time we've seen bipartisan support for the nuclear sector in the US since pre-3 Mile Island, so going back to the 70s, first time in 45 years. I've already illustrated the clear demand and necessity really for a domestic supply of uranium that's not at the mercy of potentially adversary nations. The Department of Energy has started the early stages of building back a strategic uranium reserve with tenders out currently for the initial contract amounts for domestically produced material. There's been a number of acts through Congress that have enhanced the entire nuclear fuel cycle, with a lot of emphasis on the conversion and enrichment aspects of it. Everything that's advanced on the nuclear side ultimately comes down to the need for more and more yellow cake, which is our product. We're the only really dependable 24/7 carbon-free power source that's out there that can handle baseload power. Wind and solar are fine and they have their place, but as we all know, the wind doesn't blow all the time and the sun certainly doesn't shine all the time. So clearly, if we're going to have a carbon-free green world, nuclear is a key part of it. Speaking of the nuclear fuel cycle, this will give you a bit of an idea of the time that's involved in many of the processes. We produce yellow cake, that is uranium U3O8, and that is shipped in drums by truck, by special carriers to the conversion plant in Metropolis, Illinois. There it is converted into UF6, which is a gas, goes to the enrichment plant where that gas is spun down into centrifuges, enriching the Mother Nature's 0.7% U235 up to about 5% U235. That then goes into fabrication of fuel rods and bundles that go into the nuclear plant. The purpose of the slide, not only to illustrate the many steps of the fuel cycle, but the timing of it. It takes roughly 2 to 2.5 years from when we produce the yellow cake until it actually gets into the nuclear power plant. This creates a long-term scheduling issue for the utilities. It also represents a market that doesn't respond instantly to such things as blockades of supply coming in from Russia or other potential sources. Our particular pipeline of projects that I'd mentioned, this is a map of the Western US showing the primary uranium production basins. Our operations are centered in Texas for the immediate future, as we will have production coming on in 2023 from the Rosita plant. And that will be augmented by Upper Sand Creek, a second project there that comes in 24. Permits have already been issued to incorporate the Upper Sand Creek into the Rosita operations as a satellite. Work has been continuing on the South Dakota Dewey Burdock project. This one is scheduled for 2025. And in fact, I've just returned from South Dakota, where I've spent several weeks over the last couple of months on community relations and moving things forward on that. Our Gas Hills, Wyoming project is right on the heels of South Dakota, coming in 26. And then that follows up in 27 and the out years by New Mexico, where we have a huge storehouse of value. New Mexico does face more permitting challenges, as well as developing a positive relationship with the Navajo Nation to move that forward. South Texas production highlights, I think I've already hit on this, other than we have 1.6 million pounds a year of capacity. We do have satellite infrastructure so that remote fields can be exploited and then processed at our central plants. And again, two of the very few licensed plants. This is a map of the Rosita area. Our first production next year will come from the yellow outline on the north side of the highway there, known as the Rosita extension. Rosita South will continue to contribute in the out years, and that's on the yellow blob you see on the south side of the highway. We've also identified a number of other layers, but beneath the main productive layer here, which is quite shallow, a couple hundred feet. So there are other layers below that contain uranium, and we'll be working to move those along as we go. Just some shots of the renovation of the plant, the bags of resin. I want to highlight some of the Dewey Burdock economics, as this will be the second project coming in. 17 million pounds, located right on the Wyoming border. Incredibly robust economic projections, IRR 55%, low capex of 31 million, and that's based on a $35 uranium price. Similarly, the Gas Hills, which will be the third project coming on in Wyoming, we're looking at a very, very good 7-year mine life with IRR exceeding 40% after tax, and that here again is based on very low prices of uranium at $35. So both these projects would fall in the lowest 10% of cost and in the upper 15 or 20% of profitability projects on the horizon. And then you can see our dominant long-term holding in New Mexico, where we hold over 50% of the resources there, and the deposits are quite large. Crown Point being the lead project, just as an example, 32 million pounds at over 0.1. And I should mention all of our ISR resources in South Dakota, Wyoming, and New Mexico are in excess of 0.10% U3O8, which is a very good grade when compared to most of the recent producers and most of our peers that have most of the resources in the 0.07 to 0.08 range, some as low as 0.04. So higher grade, long-lived ISR projects are the core of the company, along with an incredibly gifted staff, and being able to capitalize on our other assets, being non-core assets, and as I mentioned, our investment into the ISR applications for other metals such as gold, which, if successful, would revolutionize the entire mining industry. In summary, we have a very clear-cut, a well-structured company with a path to production starting in 2023 at Rosita, followed up by additional Texas production from the Upper Sand Creek with the 2 plants we have there. We have phased expansion, allowing for increased production at Rosita, and then moving into other states with the South Dakota Dewey Burdock project, and then moving on into Gas Hills, Wyoming, ultimately in New Mexico. We look to build the company's production to 5 million pounds a year prior to entering New Mexico. After New Mexico, that'll go up by a couple million pounds a year. We see this being a multi-decade cycle in the nuclear energy business, and we intend to be at the forefront of that on the green side with the ISR production in the world's largest consumer of our product, the United States. And with that, I would open it up to any questions.
Okay, William, thank you so much for that. That was terrific. You really squeezed a lot in there.
Well, we're quite active, as you pointed out, and we've got a very excited, dynamic team working on a number of fronts.
Okay, uranium is not something that we're incredibly used to here. We're miners, gold, oil and gas, pharma, but uranium, we don't do so much uranium in the UK, so it's absolutely fantastic to have you on tonight. And in-situ leaching, why have you chosen to specialize in in-situ leaching, and what are the advantages and disadvantages versus the open pit, underground, and you know, however else you might get your hands on uranium?
Sure. And the UK should have a keen interest in uranium as you're building Hinkley, which is one of the largest plants in the world. And it's moving forward, and quite an impressive construction site, I'd point out as well. But
very good. And we've got Sizewell C as well, but not all these things are terribly popular in the UK. But, you know, I'm a fan, but not everybody is.
Understand it. It's been a controversy, and rightfully so, with the spectacular coverage of a few of the events over the last 30 or 40 years. But you know, I'd point out that coal, which everyone's quite familiar with, has a a fatality rate of 4 orders of magnitude greater than nuclear energy per unit of energy. So it's nuclear is the safest we have. It has the same health hazards of solar and wind, which are at the lowest end of the spectrum. So once people dig through that initial media hype and sensationalism, they find out that indeed it's a very, very safe power source and key to the future of the planet. But getting back to your original question on ISR and why ISR, very simply, we are concerned with the planet. We do want to produce green energy. We don't want to be involved with giant open pits that scar the landscape. We don't want to be involved with tailings dams that have the potential to breach and break. We don't want to be involved with tailings, which stored on top of the ground can be remobilized by wind and turned into dust. Not to mention the multi-decade proposition of doing reclamation on a conventional mine, especially one that has radiological implications. You can be there 50 or 60 years cleaning it up. And as many of them have been and still are around the world. So with In-situ, we have a short development period of time. We do all of our, we don't really mine. Calling it a mine is a misnomer. We're actually a water treatment company. We drill wells, we inject oxygen. That's the only lixiviant or only product that we inject along with the water into the ground. Basically, the uranium is stopped in the sandstone due to a redox reaction, going from a reduced state, going from an oxidized state where it's dissolved in water to a reduced state where it's fixed on the outside grains of sandstone. So by injecting oxygen, we're simply reversing Mother Nature's process and reabsorbing the uranium or taking it back into solution. And we pump that to the surface, typically in very small concentrations, but lots of gallons of water, something on the order of 30 or 40 parts per million. And there we run it through a municipal water treatment facility, series of long tubes where we perform ion exchange with beaded resin. Same thing they do in your municipal water supply system all over the world. It just happens to be that the disposal product is our economic product. And so we take the uranium and process it further and then sell it. So it's just far superior in terms of economics and in terms of its footprint on the ground and in terms of being able to fix it and return it to the original state once we're done. No comparison. And so that's why we've built the best team for ISR and why we're moving forward on that basis exclusively.
William, that was a great answer. Thank you very much indeed. The Rosita processing plant is just a mile away from the Rosita PAA. They're actually really quite close to each other. It was a uranium mine. It's currently being refurbished to become one again. So what's been done and what's still to be done?
Well, the plant was the biggest chunk of the work, and it's been fully retrofitted with modern alarms and electronic wizardry. I'm a geologist, so it's a little beyond me in terms of the exact technical breakdown, but all the technological advances have been now put into the mills or into the processing plant since it last operated in 2009. And it had been renovated then in 2005 up to standards then, but of course the standards keep advancing. So, we're state of the art on that processing plant now. In terms of the well field, drilling has been going on for over a year now. We've put in our monitor wells, which go around the ore body as well as above it and below it to ensure that our oxygenated water that we're injecting doesn't leave the area that we're pumping from. We always pump about 0.5% more water than we inject to make sure that we control the direction of the water flow. It'll flow towards low pressure, and by overproducing 0.5%, it goes exactly where we want it to go. Nonetheless, the monitor wells are there for a sense of security. And, we're about, have all the monitor wells in, everything's cased from the ground, from the bottom all the way to the top to ensure, here again, integrity of the system. And we're about 60% of the way through installing the actual well fields in the production PAA. So we would look forward to having that completed, I would say probably early second quarter next year, or early to mid second quarter, and then production would be ensuing shortly thereafter.
And could you give us some sense of CapEx? I was thinking it was a very CapEx light project because it's refurbishment, but you've now told me it's state of the art, and I'm thinking, okay.
Well, it is. A lot of this is because we were fortunate enough to inherit a 26-man work crew on site that had actually operated the plant during the previous cycle. So, we have them on the payroll and don't count them as CapEx, but their labor was a big part of being able to do many of the renovations ourselves, excuse me. And so our CapEx on the entire plant renovation was right at $1 million US. and it came in on time with a couple of supply chain interruptions, but it's all done now. And the actual well field itself is about something on the order of $4 to $5 million for installation. So you're right, the capex is very low, but then again, we benefited from the bulk of the expense on the plant having already been spent by our predecessors. And so that typically $25 million expense was something we weren't having to bear. We were the clear beneficiaries of that. And so the next
good business, William.
Well, timing, right? You know, we started this. We started this 12 years ago, and we're silent for the first 10. And then we saw a sea change coming in uranium, both politically and in terms of supply and demand. And we're quick to move on some producing assets, or production assets rather, not producing, but production assets that we can quickly bring into production. And we're also benefiting from very shallow depths. Our pumping depths at Rosita on the first well field will be under 200 feet, and the second one about 250 feet. So our lifting cost, if you will, for the water is very, very low.
So you've done very well, I have to say. I'm going to ask you about nuclear fuels, but I have to say, not only have you been doing Rosita, you've been doing Dewey Burdock and Upper Sand Creek. My goodness, you know, you guys are phenomenally busy, but not too busy to have done a deal. So not only are you going forwards, but you're doing something with you know, another asset that you own.
Well, and the rationale behind nuclear fuels is really quite simple, although explanation certainly required. enCore is not an exploration company. We're a production company. We have a whole pipeline of projects ready to sequentially go into production and beef up our production profile up to that targeted 5 million and beyond pounds per annum. And along the way, we are also beneficiaries of the largest proprietary database on uranium in the United States, one that I've been assembling since 1986. And in the US, unlike many jurisdictions, the data that is generated on properties geologically stays private. It's not available to the public. So it's quite valuable. And in the course of reviewing that, from time to time, we find major jewels that are exploration projects, not quite ready for production, but quite promising. And when we do, we need to find a home for them, because here again, we aren't exploration. Our shareholders invest in us for production and for the profits and benefits from production. So rather than just auctioning it off to just anyone, we actually look for companies with very good management, very good technical ability, that can actually take those exploration assets and bring them up to the standards at which they would fit into a production pipeline. That is, take the risk and prove up the good, promising geology into a solid production play. And we've done just that at Nuclear Fuels with the KC project, which is an enormous exploration project in Wyoming. I personally believe it to be the best one in the US currently. Clearly an ISR target, multiple stratigraphic units, extends over 26 miles. We've got the entire district under control. It's going to cost, you know, ultimately $20 million to drill it out, maybe a bit more. And our shareholders don't want the distraction where that money could be going into renovating plants, drilling well fields, getting into production. But what we have done is we've retained the right to back into this. So we've placed it with a company with good technical expertise. We've put 2 members of our team on their board. I'm one of the nominees, along with another gentleman, and to ensure that it moves in the right direction. And should it turn into a sizable 15 million pound or larger deposit, we have the right to buy back in a 51% interest for a multiple of what the Nuclear Fuels has spent on the project. And that would pop it right into our production profile. So we've retained an interest in it. We keep our eyes on it, but someone else is actually developing it to the resource state. And then we'll take another hard look at it to possibly put it back into our production pipeline once it's ready.
William, a final question for you. I'm so sorry we're out of time, but I've got a fantastic question for you. We've had Consolidated Uranium on, we've had Labrador Uranium on, and they both told us that they see a global uranium supercycle coming, perhaps in 2024. So is that what you see? And is that why you're, 2 years ago, you started to develop all these different projects?
I think I would agree with that. I might frame it a bit differently. I think here again, I prefer the baseball analogy. I know it's not a popular sport there, perhaps, but
we can quote.
the game hasn't started. We're in warm-ups. You're starting to see the prices move. There's a high likelihood there are going to be some interruptions in the flow through St. Petersburg at some point, unfortunately. Quite frankly, the revenue on uranium to Mr. Putin is insignificant compared to his oil and gas revenue. So if he wanted to be a bit of a pain, he could flip the switch and cause us some severe problems in the US and the Western world on the uranium front. And so far, he's been quite prone to do these things. So we aren't dependent upon that because here again, the current supply demand is in the favor of the producer anyway. That would simply be an exacerbating event. But I think you're going to see a decade of improving economics and improving use for nuclear industry, much like the decade leading up into the late 60s and 70s, where we were planning to have 4 times the number of reactors on Earth that we do now. Now those plans were interrupted, or as I say, put on hold or interrupted, or about the same. But I think you're going to see a similar build-out plan. I mean, you hardly go a week now without some nation announcing a new plan to build a nuclear reactor. You're seeing countries that have deemed to shut down reactors, extending the lives of those. You're seeing in the US, you're seeing a lot of reactors that had a certain power output rating being granted a higher output rating. Well, obviously, if you get more power out, you have to put more fuel in. So everything right now is lined up in favor of uranium. I'm sure there'll be a few little minor bumps along the road, but I think we're in for a super cycle is a good term for it, but I think I prefer to call it we're in for a very good, healthy industry for a multi-decade period for the first time, really, since the advent of nuclear power. And
investors take note. Investors take note. A healthy cycle for 10 years to come. We've just been speaking to William Sheriff. He's the executive chairman at enCore Energy. He's been speaking to me from Colorado, live from Colorado. Thank you so much, William. That was fantastic.